The U.S. Mexico borderlands are much more than dystopia. This expansive region holds immense biodiversity and unique ecosystems that span from scorching deserts to lush subtropical lagoons, and that are increasingly bisected by geopolitical divisions. In February 2025, a panel of conservation scientists and practitioners from both sides of the U.S. Mexico border, convened by the Society for Conservation Biology's Smith Fellows Program, gathered to discuss the intricacies of cross-border ecologies and biodiversity conservation, community resilience, and the imperative for sustainable and inclusive strategies that benefit both people and nature. This in-depth discussion, which has been edited for length and clarity, traverses the cultural, historical, and socioeconomic dimensions of conservation in this ecologically and culturally diverse region. I'm Michelle Maria Erli Capistran, a postdoctoral researcher at Stanford University and the moderator of this collective discussion. Please join us in this enriching conversation on the future of biodiversity in the borderlands.
There's a magical, extremely magical place in the border. It's called the Quito Vaquito Springs. It's one of these evolutionary wonders. And it has a border wall in front of it that actually cracked, and
you bisect all of these different ecological, cultural, biocultural connection. The flow is just running counter to a lot of the impediments we're trying to put on the landscape.
These kind of obscure fears, or whatever fears, policies, decisions, they're becoming normalized, and we're accepting them as valid.
South of the wall, there's a whole universe, and north of the wall, there's a whole universe that we still have a lot of work to do, and it's still gorgeous, still amazing. There's amazing communities in both sides. So
there is no wall that can keep people separated, that can keep nature separated.
Thank you all for being here today. I'm Michelle Maria Erli Capistran. I'm an anthropologist by training, turned oceanographer, proudly trained at UNAM. And I'm just very happy to be here today. I've been working in the Sonoran Desert for 10 plus years, and this place is just extremely special to me. And I think we could not be here at a more timely moment. So I'm just really grateful that we have all these amazing minds gathered here, and all the passion and all of the care that we have collectively, and that hopefully we can start charting paths forward, through these times. And I'm just going to hand it over to each of you. If you could take a few minutes to just introduce yourselves, your organizations, and your work.
Sure. Juan Carlos Bravo. I'm the Associate Director of Wildlands Network. We're an international organization headquartered in Salt Lake City. We've got a Mexico program, and we will soon be having a Canadian program as well. Our focus is North America and mainly advancing connectivity issues across jurisdictions so that wildlife and biodiversity can adapt to climate change, continue its historical migratory routes, et cetera, and in general create a network of protected lands across the continent that can sustain life through all manner of changes. I'm based out of Hermosillo, Sonora. I used to work formerly for 15 years. I worked for a Mexican nonprofit out of Mexico City and Sonora. And part of my work there was establishing and expanding the Northern Jaguar Reserve, which is the northernmost protected area, privately protected area for the northernmost breeding jaguar population in the continent, which has in a way shaped a lot of the conversation around wildlife and the borderlands.
Nice to meet all of you. Rodrigo Sierra. So I'm the Executive Director of Borderlands Restoration Network. We are a regional binational organization, and we have three main pillars in our work. One is land protection for wildlife movement, and mostly doing land acquisition in the States. It's extremely expensive, so it needs to be very well thought out, and where you connect so you can achieve wildlife movement in the future, pretty much achieving reducing development challenges for, again, wildlife movement mostly. And actually we're just post a hiring position, which is kind of weird to be hiring this time, and we're looking for conservation strategies to pretty much increase that capacity across the region. And then the second one, that is the name, it's we do a lot of restoration, old-fashioned conservation was like, buy the land, kick the people, and it'll be fine. And now we know that the systems actually need a lot of work, and that humans are an integral part of whatever happens next. Kind of like we're not facing biological problems. And the third portion is education. So we have education programs across, again, both sides of the border, where we focus on mostly ecological, environmental, and social justice. Kind of like not really kind of like, again, moving a little bit away from like the traditional environmental education and really landing on sense of place, pride, leadership, and kind of like really tie that to where do you live and how do you interact with nature around you. So that's kind of like what the organization does. I'm originally from Central Mexico in Querétaro. I have my PhD from the National University. I've been working in the region for like 25 years now, from bachelor's dissertation to PhD, and running a lot of conservation and setting some biosphere reserves in the borderlands. So a lot of time. I'm based in Tucson, and my office is 20 minutes east from Nogales.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Ben Wilder, and I'm born and raised in Tucson, Arizona. My mom was actually born here in Nogales, Arizona, and my family had a department store just over on Morley Street for over a century here in Nogales. So it's special to be here in this context, too. So I'm director and co-founder of the Next Generation Sonoran Desert Researchers, or NGen for short, or La Nueva Generación. And we started in 2012 with the simple idea of trying to identify, is there like still a community and a continuity of people that are dedicating their lives and careers and passions to studying and conserving the Sonoran Desert? Born in Tucson, I had the great fortune to kind of grow up in this desert rat community, but we saw it fragmenting by the increasingly hardening border after the 2001 context, after 9/11, and then just academic siloization. Anyway, the answer to that question was a resounding yes. This community absolutely exists, and what was supposed to be a 3-day meeting really became a bit of a movement. And so we identified that there really is a need to create this platform to facilitate collaboration at its core across borders and across disciplines. And so that's what we've been doing since. So we have, roughly about 1,000 members across the entire greater Sonoran Desert region. So it's all of Baja California, Gulf of California, down as far into Sonora, and then southern parts of California and Arizona, parts of New Mexico. We kind of expand our borders occasionally. And we, again, just really first and foremost try to create that facilitate. Really at the core of what we do is we try to spark and catalyze what would never have happened otherwise, and just making those connections and allow people to see the region in different ways and to really connect and elevate the work that people do across the region. So we do that through gatherings, and then we kind of focus in areas that no one entity can really maybe work in that space because it's too complicated, or as organizations have different priorities that we kind of try to fill in that nexus space. So I've had great pleasure to work very closely with Michelle and that associate director for many years, in many ways, this whole group. So anyway, I guess one other piece that just I was talking, I had a great conversation with Reza too, that it's kind of a theme. I was in academia for a while and left it about 3 years ago. And so I'm exploring what doing this work outside of an academic, kind of more independent model is, and jumping in that world. So lots of great conversations we can have throughout the day.
Thanks, Ben. Morning, all. My name is Eamon Harity. I'm the Wildlife Program Manager at Sky Island Alliance, which is a nonprofit, like all of us here, based kind of a binational nonprofit focused on conservation of the Sky Islands. And are folks familiar with that term? Some yeses and some nos. It's an evocative term coined 60, 70 years ago by a writer, but the idea is that high mountains are isolated from neighboring mountains by a matrix of different habitat, right? So in this region, we have tall mountains that go all the way up to aspens and pine forests, but around them is the desert landscape. So plants, mostly smaller insects and animals, are effectively isolated. So you create this island biogeography framework, has different forces in acting upon it, but the Sky Islands is this region, about 55 islands or mountains from Hermosillo, Mexico to roughly the Phoenix, Arizona area. Sky Islands are not unique to this part of the world, but we happen to live in one of the most biodiverse Sky Island archipelagos in the world. Highest biodiversity of bees, highest diversity of mammals, highest diversity of birds in the U.S. But a lot of our work focuses on conserving the lands and waters of this really cool place for current and future generations. I work specifically on a project that is focused on the impacts of the hardening border and what that means for connectivity of the animals, primarily terrestrial animals, of our region. But I'm really excited to be here. I think we can have some fun conversation.
Thank you all. Let's just jump into it. And to get it out of the way, which was Rodrigo's great suggestion, is we all know the dystopian news, right? We all know the horror stories. This is kind of the most visible face of the border. The least engaging for what we're trying to do today, because I think part of what really needs to happen as we're going through this is getting away from the nightmare and trying to look for the hope and how we can progress and how we can move forward. So you have danger and risk are, of course, very known issues in the Sonoran Desert, both in conservation and in daily life. On both sides, how can we create more inclusive and safer spaces for people with different identities? And what can we gain from creating more inclusive conservation that allows space for different ethnicities, different genders, different ages, or people from different walks of life?
A lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess dystopian news are common to both sides of the border. It got me wondering, are we talking about the border wall or are we talking about the narcos? What are we talking about? What piece of dystopia?
These last 2 weeks have been
like state-sponsored dystopia or organized crime dystopia? So we have to definitely deal with both those things. And I don't claim to have the answer to any of these issues. What I have found is that local communities have a resiliency that often transcends those historical patterns. I had the pleasure of working in the past with the Yaqui community, and one thing that stuck with me when the whole economic collapse of 2008 was happening, and a lot of people were anxious about losing their jobs, and conservation groups were shutting off offices throughout. The Nature Conservancy closed its Sonora office and fired about 100 people, and there was all this sense of angst. And I talked to one of my Yaqui partners, asking her, how does this feel on your end? And she's like, we're fine. We grow our food, we do our things, and that has not changed at all. And it's not going to change because of something happening in Wall Street. And it really opened my eyes to how, this local level resiliency is something that we often overlook and take for granted, but that persists. The pressures of whether it's organized crime or the kind of divisiveness that is being, state sponsored by the U.S. government currently. And I think, there's value in nurturing that and in plugging into that. I think, the kind of work that local groups have the benefit of doing, like Borderlands Restoration, Sky Island Alliance, of connecting with the local communities, is something that will make them resilient. I probably have a bit more of a concern for larger groups that operate in the fussier space of we try to do everything everywhere all at once. So yeah, I would say look into that and just keep hope, keep hope that things will get better. They will get better, and then they will get worse, and then they will get better again. It's often, that life is a cycle, and we just have to soldier through some dark times to see the light again.
we start joking that Mexico trains you for crisis, and I think a lot of you came from some countries that trains you for crisis. Kind of like this is like, seen this before.
I think you guys have covered, most of the mindset of how to work with communities. If I can add a few pragmatic things for people to keep in mind. One is to consider in your budget spending the time and the money to be with people, and that often means travel. It's not a matter of like, I'm going to drive by, I'm going to meet with 15 people, and then I'll be on my way. That doesn't work. You have to actually budget for like, I'm going to travel all the way there several times a year, spend all these days there, make connections, do nothing. Exactly. If they invite me to the quinceañera, well, the budget shifts because I have to go to the quinceañera and be social and be a human being with these people. And for them, this is important. And so this might not be the trip where I'm collecting all this relevant data or something, but this is the trip where meaningful connections will be made, and I'll show up as a human being and be ready to be yourself. And that might change any number of things about you. Some might be as easy to change as I was looking at this biological problem wrong and I need to reframe it. Others will be like, what am I doing with my life? I need to completely change the course of my things, my thinking, my life, everything. Taking that into account when you're literally drafting a project. Being open with whoever is funding that project. There will be a period of time where I'm figuring shit out. I will not have known this community and their issues. I do not want to show up and say, these are the issues that I'm here to help you solve. I want to show up and listen to them and hear, like, what are the issues that you're concerned about and how can I help you? And so that means that, the first iteration of the project that I'm asking you to fund doesn't have a goal and objective and a very tangible Western-minded things that are like, yeah, we will do these and these are the benchmarks and we will achieve. It's not about achieving, it's about connecting. And once we're past the connecting phase, then, maybe we can figure out, okay, now this is the objective that we share. Not me, not my project, but we as, the people in the place and myself are sharing. And now this is the iteration of the project that I want funded. And sometimes those conversations can be hard, but if you've got clarity of where you are along the process and you're candid enough with your donor, and you're lucky enough that whoever's sponsoring that is understanding of the process, then it's more likely to be successful.
It's not as grim as it looks. It's pretty grim, but it's not as grim as it looks. And I feel like the power of communities have been pretty awesome to see. Whereas, like, if you go to every town that has been in the news, the town's still there, the community is still there. They still have their quinceañeras and bautizos and
Tortillas are being made.
Tortillas are being made every
People
day.
are being fed.
Conditions can be different, but I think that is where sometimes you need to look back to communities and the strengths. And that is when you see too the cultural differences on how communities are dramatically different. With this artificial line actually transcends just the geography. And the region where we're at is, it's very Mexican. Kind of pretty much wherever you go here, like you can live here without speaking a drop of English your entire life, and the community will provide. But then it's kind of like as far as you get from the border, you can feel the community is hardening and not being not as resilient and as welcoming as in this region. So kind of like the immediate, kind of like the point of contact. And I was talking this with a biogeographer. It was like, it's like when you think about ecosystems, right? Like ecotones are the most resilient, diverse, kind of like messy, but very interesting places. And then you go out of the ecotones and start kind of getting kind of boring. So pretty much here is like, this is like a cultural ecotone. Ecologically speaking, it's the same, but like you get into this like messy, diverse, complex, extremely fun, extremely heartbreaking, and it's very fun. I think that's what I'm staying.
Infinite.
Yeah.
As you're describing that. I think Rodrigo did such a great way of summarizing what comes together at the border, and that's why the simplistic narratives of division are so effective from the external, but because it's so complex, and the border means so many different things to so many perspectives that if you take it on those terms of the simplistic fear-based narrative, it dissolves. But if you got to flank it, you got to think of other ways to come at it the way you're describing. So again, reflecting on what you guys have said, I think of it kind of two ways. Conceptually, just like what you were saying, Rodrigo, and the work I think we try to do and think about is all the natural flows and connections are north-south. Like everything from bird migrations to mammal migrations to people migrations to the connectivity of watersheds and flow, just all is north-south. And as you go east-west, that's when you bisect all of these different ecological, cultural, biocultural connections. So just trying to reiterate how the flow is just running counter to a lot of the impediments we're trying to put on the landscape. And then very personally, I resonate so much with what you said, Juan Carlos, is if I have had the opportunity to work with local communities, especially the Concacos people on the coast, and indigenous perspectives or campesino perspectives, and that is really in many ways defined my sense of resilience and just the relationships and trust. And so I think as personally as a foreigner working in Mexico and navigating uncertain times, it just it's all about relationship building and context and communication, and the reality on the ground is almost always so different and often so much brighter than in just as a U.S. citizen traveling in Mexico. I can't describe the amount of warmth I'm always surrounded with traveling in Mexico, and it's just, so beautiful and rewarding and supportive.
One of my favorite activities we do each year, it's through NGen, the Border Bio Blitz, where it's organized from San Diego to Texas, but the idea is to collect information on the biodiversity of the borderlands, because the border, not just in our region, but from San Diego through to Texas, passes some really incredible regions. Collaborating with a group called Cuenco Los Ojos, a conservation ranch in northern Sonora and northern Chihuahua, we bring groups from the U.S. and Mexico, and we do simultaneous bio-blitzing, surveying, and then we meet at floodgates. We won't see them today, but I could show photos. Basically, there's places in the border wall where they put these big gates to allow water to flow. Lawsuits in 2023 mandated that a few of these get left open as a corridor for wildlife. But we bring people together on both sides of the border, and we shake hands and we talk about our experiences of the day, the surveys. And that blending of culture, like we've talked about, and I think that really highlights part of that question of why, or what we gain from creating a safe space, is the conversations about conservation are really rich, and you learn. All of us probably need occasionally just an opportunity to see something from a new perspective, and I think that's part of the beauty of creating safer spaces and more diverse spaces is you are exposed to a lot of different perspectives that challenge you, get you to think and create learning. But yeah, the border it is a hard place to work. It is a warm and rewarding place to work, but it's a challenging place to work because there's a lot of seemingly impossible forces working against you, right? Like, what can we do against the federal government's decision to build a wall? What I mean is, it can feel really discouraging and overwhelming.
Yeah, and I think on the diversity part, I mean, you ended with an all-male panel, and I feel like it's
tried.
And I feel like it's kind of an accident, and I hope it's like if you go to my staff page at Border Social Network, you realize that I'm an artifact of the past. Kind of like all my leadership staff are women, and we're like extremely diverse without trying too much, because again, I feel like the newer generation is changing. So kind of like there's layers that we still need to work, and some of the work is actually not in our hands. So diversity is race, colors, accents, that's fine. Gender start getting complicated. And I think that it's, again, that's a result of the geopolitical tragedy in a way. But at the same time, we all have like female staff, or non-binary staff in our organizations that are happily moving across the landscape. But again, you end with these artifacts of where we live and how we live. So hopefully next time you don't have to face this.
And it has to be acknowledged that we're here because of women leadership. It was women that brought us together and asked us to share these experiences. And I think what I've experienced is not only the same thing you're talking about, Rodrigo, seeing a lot of women in the conservation workspace, but just in general, women are, I don't feel like women are really stepping up as bravely as women are these days. And so that definitely has to be acknowledged, the leadership today in the room and in general.
Well, thank you so much. Looking back on this conversation and some of the conversations we've had yesterday about working with communities and the baggage of conservation being very top down and being like we're going to go help and we're going to educate people and we're going to make them more like us because we're illuminated. So, I think something that's really interesting is that it's starting to be more and more acknowledged that conservation should be a two-way street. Still, we have a long way to go. And just thinking of how you both so beautifully talked about, learning from the resilience of the communities and learning, how people keep going, and in spite of, life goes on. As conservationists, how do we take those steps? How do we start making conservation a conversation? Right? How do we flip the model on its head so it's that we, as conservationists, can be allies rather than implementers? And how can we learn from the people that are really the stewards of the land and should be having the ultimate say in how things get done?
Kick that off. I guess there are two things that came to mind as you said that. One was, it's kind of more of having other voices in the room in terms of a disciplinary thing. One of the things that I just reflect so much on the conversations we've had in the show. So I come at it, I'm like, botany, biogeography, very biological space. And, I kind of can think like outside the box a little bit and think of these perspectives. But I have like major blind spots on the social space. I just don't, it's not where my training, it's not where my gears turn. And then having these conversations with someone that does have that perspective of social and throwing ideas out there, that it's angles that I would never arrive at myself or think and just like pause, holy shit, that was a great point, and need to take a moment to really think about how we incorporate. So I think as much as we can get out of our disciplinary blinder space and talk to those that really come at angles and push ourselves to make sure we have as diverse and whatever, however you want to define diverse viewpoints at the table as we conceptually think about these from the beginning to the frames of conversation. I think that's to me critical. And then the other piece is very different, more on the ground. I think a lot about like economically valuing the conservation work and trying to elevate the compensation and for time or knowledge and really expanding the ways we consider what the knowledge that's being provided, just access, right? Where maybe you don't really think as broadly as possible, and making that actually have like, oh, so for local communities or just in general, I think that's a viable livelihood to go into conservation. Yeah, that's where I came at.
I have a personal rule. There's like to never use my degree. Like if I go to a new community or anything, I never come like, oh, I'm Dr. Rodrigo Silva. It's not in my business card. It's not in like, if you go to my website, it's not like Dr. Rodrigo Silva, Executive Director of like, drop the degree. It's not that useful. I mean, we can use it here, right? Because I can be like, I'm a doctor. And I'm giving a plenary next week at the Center for Range Management. There, I'm a doctor. When I go to the towns in the border, I'm Rodrigo, and I just show up and let's talk and let's sit on the ground. And in these places, I talk a lot. In those others, I listen a lot because we are very bad at listening. Like, we are terrible. Like, we show up to places and we know. And we are like, you should do this, and that, and why you haven't done this before? Like, and people look at you like, why don't you use? and the other one is to think, what are you taking and what are you leaving? Like, we are, science and conservation has been extremely extractive over time, and we're the ones that are with the degrees, with the tenure track positions, with the fancy jobs, and the communities most likely don't see us ever again. So like if you're only taking, probably you should reconsider what is your approach to the places. It's hard, I mean, because giving too is like you need to figure out what you can give and why it actually is needed. But I feel like, and not always happen, but at least having that personal challenge of like, I'm taking a lot because pretty much I showed up and this is going to be in my benefit, like my dissertation is only for me. And what I'm leaving behind, kind of how am I part of this, not just an spectator that took advantage.
I like the listening piece, Rodrigo. I think that's a really important piece, is approaching a conversation or a place through listening rather than talking, I think is sometimes the first step to do.
Yeah, I think my best kind of professional period. I mean, like we go through these things. And I joined the National University like 2005 in the Pleistocene. And the project that we were running was to try to build this federally protected area in Janos, Chihuahua. Today is the Janos Biosphere Reserve. And I joined as a field tech. I was making nothing. I was making like 150 a month. They were covering or stay at this like research station, which was just a house in one of the little communities. We have a non-four-wheel drive pickup truck that gets us stuck once a day. And because we're like building kind of like the narrative to do the protected area, our job was pretty much to find stuff. Like Gerardo, advisor, would be like, find porcupines. So, as Avon mentioned, Mexico doesn't have public land, so all this will be either private or community owned, but at the end everything is private. So in order to find the porcupines, you need to find who owns the land and you need to talk to them, and then you need to get access. So 1 week was like find porcupines, the next one will be like we need to find nesting raptors. Okay, completely different change and different thing. And then be like ask if there's jaguars. Okay, and so we were just like we spent 3 years just looking for things and meeting people. And then we developed our methodology was patio, coffee, tequila. So it's kind of like, because I mean, you showed up and you're like, hey, I'm from the National University and I'm looking for porcupines. And they'll be like, yeah, like there. And they close the door and then you go. And then you come back and you come back and you come back. And eventually they'll be like, you want some coffee? And then you're like, oh, we achieved the second layer. Like now we're drinking coffee. And then you return enough times, then they'll be like, let's stay for a drink. And that's when you're like, okay, now, and I, like, some of my best friends are people that I met doing, but again, it was like 3 years of just like us going, and at the end, that people were the people that signed the request for the federal government to implement the biosphere reserve, because without the signatures of these people, and all that was because of relationship building, because we're like, we want to go to the porcupines. We're like, yeah, to go to the porcupines, you need to help us with the cows first. We're like, okay, I guess we're doing cows, and we never made it to the porcupines. So it's fun, and it takes time. It's extremely rewarding.
Showing up.
Yeah.
It is from a pragmatic thing, it creates a little bit of a conflict with funding agencies and grants, because as Carlos mentioned, it's very objective. Western kind of science and framework is very objective and very timeline based. And then but doing the work on the ground, working with communities is takes a reframing and a slowing down. And I think it creates a challenge that you'll have to navigate, or folks have to navigate, and learn how to converse and how to convey that it's not incompatible. It's not that it's incompatible. It's just that it takes time, and it takes a reassessing and working on budgets and changing the way we all are trained in academia.
Thank you. Well, thinking again about these issues of funding, and funding disparity is a really big issue, not just in the U.S. Mexico border, but, in a lot of cases of conservation that's done with the tropical majority, or, north to south. So how can we change that? Or how is that approached in our work? At least I think in a lot of cases, yesterday we talked about the border BioBlitz and how the first time was done with a budget of $0, right? And how
That's this year too.
Yeah, I think, one of the things of like learning from communities, but also learning from researchers in the global south is also, like Rodrigo was talking about, how do we just get punk rock with this and just get it done, and yeah, just if folks could talk a little bit about their issues of approaching funding disparities and how, yeah, maybe just pick a top. It's something we talk about all day, right?
The whole approach that we take with Engine is being grassroots, ground up. What is our collective voice? What are we identifying as the needs? And just trying to be as authentic and representative of that and what's emerging, and just being about, no, this is how we're pursuing it, and trying to find those opportunities where you do get the nice alignment between funders and vision. But there's a lot of pressure to follow the money and to follow the agendas. And so one of the ways that I think we've organized Engine is to try to be really nimble, talking about that budget, so we're not beholden to big dollars amounts. Be really mindful in terms of how we grow, to grow super slowly and cautiously, so we, at the end of the day, can be our own bosses, can pick our agendas, and can really be true to our narrative and the goals, rather than having to chase the money around. But if you want to grow, you got to pay your staff. You got to grow, and then to get that level of money next up, well, it's hard. So scalability, I think, is a huge thing, and we've been fortunate in our organization to be able to stay nimble and small by design, so we don't have to get huge budgets that we have to inflate, but to be able to support. But then you can't do as much too. So it's a trade-off. It's really hard.
Every 5 years, I get a professional crisis. It's kind of like around every 5 years, where I'm like, I should be making more money. I should apply for the Nature Conservancy. I'm out of this shit. Like, no more punk rock approach to conservation. Then funding is hard. I mean, this region is kind of like within Mexico and the U.S. It's attractive, but it's not shiny because of everything that you know about this region. We have like a identity crisis because we all here know that the place is amazing, but most donors, and especially big donors, don't have a clue. Like I like these last 2 years, I've been having conversations with big foundations, and when I start talking about this place, they're like, I couldn't imagine that place being like that. It's like, yeah, you mean like a skinny coyote
Chasing a roadrunner.
Yeah, exactly. Like dirt and no biological significance whatsoever. So first is like how people see you, who you are. And then there's donors that have the sensitivity to see that what you do, it's important, but it's hard to find them. You never know if they're going to stay with you for the long run. So it's always chasing, always checking back who you are and what you want to do. Sometimes you need to chase the money because if that's the only funding you have to pay staff, so be it. Kind of like people need to eat. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, kind of like if you can do punk rock stuff, sometimes, I mean, sometimes money is not the answer, but if you need to pay rent, money is the answer. So finding the balance.
I think I could summarize some of these things with, you have to be true to yourself so that you're not extended into trying to achieve a bunch of things. And that involves also recognizing what your core skills are and what are also your core objectives, because there's a bunch of things we'd love to have around our work. So you start working on a species and then you realize, oh, there's this system or this other species or this community. And since everything is connected, you start figuring out, oh, this is a whole world, but you stay true to your core, and that'll make it easier for you to remain nimble. And if you're true to who you are, then it's also easier to find your niche, and you'll find that, okay, there's value in what I'm adding to this whole system. So to give you a simple example, we don't do restoration, so it makes a lot more sense for us to partner with an organization that does restoration then. But we've been very successful in advancing policies in Mexico and the U.S. and at the state level. And so we're working a lot with legislators trying to change the legal framework of how we do conservation. We do road ecology, and we bring in the road ecology piece. But oftentimes, the land protection that needs to happen around, say, a wildlife crossing over a highway, we're not going to buy that land or manage that land. That's not our organization. So partnerships become super important. And then you're not trying to extend your budget so that your project achieves everything and it's your brand on everything. It's no, what's my niche? Now, how can we make this a collective project where all of us are thriving and bringing something to the table, the sum of which is a lot larger than any of us could achieve. And then there's going to be times of just, leanness. So there's going to be times when there's not going to be enough to go around.
And all of you are young ecologists, so now you know that the niche theory is being challenged and competition is not being seen as in the past. And it works kind of like in the similar way in the non-profit world. It's like, if we all do the same, then it's kind of like, well, let's just have one organization and we'll work together. And if you're not going to be the same, kind of like try to be different because you avoid competition.
Thank you, everyone. Well, I think we could kick off with that last note, thinking about the complexity of working in this very turbulent, socioeconomic, cultural, political environment. As organizations, I know a lot of us have had to deal with facing horrific things, and also being kind of limited or having to be very cautious or, very nuanced in how we approach these things. How can we as conservationists and also as organizations approach working in these spaces where our work is inevitably kind of come up face to face with these really tough issues, ethical issues, moral issues that, encompass both the natural system and the social contexts that we're working in, that are multiple social contexts also, right?
I don't have an answer, but I have an example. So there's a magical, extremely magical place in the border. It's called the Quito Vaquito Springs. I don't know if you're familiar with that. So it's at the Organ Pike National Monument. And it's a spring, 4 times this room. It's fed by a natural spring in the core of the Sonoran Desert. Within that spring, there's 3 microendemic species. I think it's 1 fish, 1 turtle, and 1 snail that only happen there, right? And a little bit of drainages around, but it's one of these for us nature geeks, is one of those evolutionary wonders. And then that place happens to be in the middle between Rocky Point or Puerto Peñasco and some of the Tono O'odham communities. Help me here, Ben. And culturally speaking, for the Tono O'odham, that's part of their salt run, so sacred place, right? So evolutionary, ecologically, culturally. And then it's 150 yards from the international border. And it has a border wall in front of it that actually crack it, and they have to do some restoration stuff. And then from that wall, 20 meters south is Highway 2, because it's one of the busiest highways in Mexico. So you go there and everything happens, everything at once. So I would tell people, if you want to understand this region, go to Quito Vaquito. It's kind of that gives you, it's like a slap in the face. Because you're there and actually there's you're standing next to the spring and the border wall is there and the border wall is all chopped. Kind of that's where cartel and human trafficking happens the most. So you go there and you can see where they cut it and then Border Patrol patch it and you see a lot of Border Patrol traffic. So I think for me that is if I have to explain someone the border and we only have 4 hours, I would take them there and be just sit and watch.
You painted such a great picture. I want to add on a couple more layers on the history question. So that what we see today is, I went there as a student and saw this beautiful spring oasis in the desert. I've come to realize that that's a totally human developed space that was dammed, but there were generations of, earlier on there was a Atom Mexican family that lived there, created this incredible orchard with granadas, like this huerta, this beautiful mix of species. But that, but that was, so then that spring, that's like iconic spring, that was like a human artifact. But then that Mexican Atom replaced Atom settlement there that was there for centuries. And then you throw on a national park or a monument on top of that removed the people, the family that had been there for generations, and the field, the huerta, disappeared within years, just a couple years. What took over a century to develop, and all those plants are gone now. So there's awesome example in terms of the layers there.
Going back to the connectivity issue, again, that's the specialty of our organization. Our niche has been connectivity across jurisdictional borders. And one of the things we've learned is there is no recipe for it. You have to actually connect with the people along those borders and figure out what the issues are and figure a way to help them and use the nimbleness of a nonprofit to connect the pieces that governments can't. There's often a reason why the government of Arizona is not talking to the government of Sonora and talking about certain things, or the government of the U.S. with the Canadian government about their things between Maine and New Brunswick. And so we're figuring out exactly what are the things that all of these communities are concerned about. And then we find, okay, so to give you an example, in Sonora, everybody was worried about this Highway 2 as it crosses Cuenca Los Ojos, where the bioblitzes are done. So we've been working on the issue of Highway 2, trying to make wildlife crossings along that highway so that the different portions of Cuenca Los Ojos, this privately protected area, can continue connected, which is right along the border, which is right on a corridor for jaguars and bears and many other species, where there's still a gap on the border wall. And so connectivity persists to this day there. I'm sure it won't survive 4 years, but some form of it will manage. And then you enter the question of, which I think is very pertinent, how do you manage conservation and keeping true to your conservation conversation when there's all these human rights issues that you can't just ignore, right? It's a multifaceted question. At some level, you have to be pragmatic and say, we are wildlife specialists, and we've worked very effectively with Sky Island Alliance in documenting where wildlife are crossing, to the point where the Department of Homeland Security has used our work to develop wildlife crossings on the border wall, like little very small windows for animals to cross the border wall, and we're monitoring it. We're not bragging about huge success. We made the border wall permeable because there is a human element to it. And I often remind people we do the wildlife connectivity work because we acknowledge that species, in following these routes, are trying to improve the conditions for their lives. Whether it's a pronghorn looking for water or a bird looking for better winter ranges, etc., etc. Humans are just another species that needs to migrate to improve their condition. And if we can't afford humans the same grace we afford these animals, then there's something fundamentally wrong with our approach to all these things. And so I remind people the drive to move from one place to another to improve your condition is an instinctual drive of all life in this planet. Humans are no different. The whole notion of borders detaining that movement is just antithetical to life on Earth as it is. And at some point we'll need to acknowledge it and say, we can be done with borders. There's just no sense in having it. Things will always want to move, whether it's pronghorn or birds or humans. That is just the nature of things. And trying to go against nature, that doesn't usually work very well.
And I think actually I was looking at the paint behind you because that's the border wall. I didn't notice until just now. And maybe one way, it's first to be going back to where we started before, is what your organization does. Because again, we cannot be the Borderlands restoration and human rights and all that stuff.
Policy.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of that's not big enough, but it's not just about jaguars and fishes and plants. And we have this big conversation of if you don't talk about all these things together, you're missing the point. We're not doing everything because you can't, but you cannot describe this place without
Acknowledging.
everything, right?
About elevating and giving voice to partners. I think that's what you're getting at, right?
Yeah.
Is there's some really important humanitarian groups, and acknowledging it, keeping them in the public awareness and supporting them however you can, because it is a very, very real part of the border.
Michelle, when you asked that question, it made me think a lot about the border statement we were trying to write. So as NGen, this was in the beginning of the first Trump administration, and as the reality of the wall building was playing out, we set forward to try to, one of the things that we can do is kind of this independent organization that like brings together a lot of individuals, is we can kind of make position statements and help like set like tone and hopefully get some attention towards and act in ways as individual voices rather than the institution. We thought, okay, this is a natural. We'll make a statement on the border wall. We clearly oppose this. But then as we got into the practice of actually writing that, we realized that and kind of I touched on this earlier, it was because we were taking it on the terms that were being force fed to us, and they're being again and continuously that of the wall as division as the embracing it like as the wall. We realized that okay, what that means to me growing up in Tucson means something totally different than it went to you, Michelle, growing up in Mexico as a citizen of Mexico, than it meant to our indigenous members, to just every single person. It meant something different. It was like, we cannot write a cohesive statement on this. And we tried for so I can't imagine the amount of time they put into that. And ultimately we abandoned it because it was like, this is going to cause more division than anything. And then to me, it was like, holy shit, we got to rethink this whole approach. And that's what we've been referencing a little bit, the Border BioBlitz, which is a community science-driven effort that takes in the biological space. A lot of our members are the experts, right, on how do you identifying species along the border, but let's bring this open to communities levels and going to the border and documenting the beauty of both the collaboration, but also the species that are there. And so that's kind of the flanking, right, of not being taken the narrowest fed to us, but trying to think of other ways to approach it.
It's doing jujitsu. I think a lot of what we do every day is policy jujitsu, political jujitsu, and trying to just redirect those forces and so they fall over by themselves.
I want to go back to something you mentioned, Ben, which is the history. Being cognizant of the history of a place becomes fundamental to trying to have any kind of positive impact on that space. If you come to the Borderlands and think, okay, so this is the Borderlands, and I'm going to work on this species, and I don't care about the whole history of it, you're not going to be very effective. You might get some data on your species and whatnot, but in terms of moving the conservation needle towards better integrated systems for protecting wildlife and landscapes, you have to look back, and understand the different histories of the countries on each side, whether it's Mexico and the U.S. or the U.S. and Canada or whatever jurisdiction you're working across borders, and understand their legal systems, their land tenure systems, the way they manage the landscape, their interests. They're not going to be the same for all these different jurisdictions. But going back to how do you actually make it work? Those histories of these places, and you learn about their legal systems, and you learn about their culture and their cookies and whatever it is you need to learn about. But that takes a lot of just reading through things and keeping an open mind. If you put your blinders on and say, I'm a biologist and I'm working on this particular genetic feature of this particular species, that'll only get you so far in the Borderlands. It's just, there's no way you can understand and support those around you unless you're always aware of it might be standing on an ejido, but before that it was Tohono O'odham land, and before that, and it was broken apart by, a war between the U.S. and Mexico in the 19th century. You'd be surprised how many people don't even know that the U.S. invaded Mexico in the 19th century, and so there.
It's not taught in schools anymore.
It's not taught in schools, exactly. It's not, and they don't know, that the U.S. Army was actually in Mexico City, and considering the whole question, which becomes relevant today, are we taking over this country and controlling everything? And I think racism was what stopped it. They didn't want to have to deal with a bunch of brown people problems. They wanted the land, they wanted the resources, so they took, Colorado, Nevada, California, Texas, all of that they took, but they didn't want to take, the places that were more heavily populated. They didn't want to suddenly have the U.S. state be responsible for a bunch of brown people problems. They wanted to simply take over that land. In their fiction, it was land open for the taking because there were no, heavily populated areas. There were tons of tribes there and there was a bunch of people, but those, were perceived as something we can put a train through, shoot them away from the land, and eventually, we'll take over the land, which is basically what happened. So, when people around me ask, do you think Trump's going to invade Mexico? I don't think they want to deal with brown people problems anymore. I don't think they will actually invade Mexico. I think there's going to be, other kinds of interventions, but not a full-scale invasion, So I'm not especially concerned about that when it comes to that.
Okay, well, this last one is a two-part question. So the first part is, what's your favorite Sonoran Desert food? And then how do you envision a future for the Borderlands and your own or your organization's role in creating it?
For the future, I love a graffiti that I saw on a border wall in Gaza that said, "This wall will also fall." And that keeps me going. Because I know this wall will also fall. There is no wall that can keep people separated, that can keep nature separated. I was talking about how, the nature of nature is to connect things. And there's no amount of things that we can do that will split that connectivity. When will that happen? I don't know. 9% sure I won't live to see it. It's already happening in a sense with what's going on with the floodgates. Mm-hmm. Floodgates are these infrastructures that literally gates to let seasonal flows pass through without wrecking the whole thing. And, they tried keeping them closing and opening on a programmed basis. It didn't work out because nobody has a magic ball where they can say, oh, it's going to rain a lot tomorrow and better open them. And so what happened was a bunch of them were just destroyed in flash floods. And so we're seeing, there's already gaps happening in the wall. These wildlife crossings that we've got DHS to build are already happening. And so it will become a permeable border over time. Not quickly enough for some species, that's for sure. It's still a huge issue, but we have to keep working on helping people understand that we're better when we're connected than when we're separated. And with food, exactly. That's one way to attack.
No, but the question was what's your favorite food?
My favorite Borderlands food, Sonoran desert food. That's an interesting border.
Like for a vegetarian.
Yeah, I am originally from Mexico City, so moving to Sonora and the land of the carne asada, it's like, no, I'm not that much into beef, but I guess, burritos can be, quite something. Tortillas de harina are a favorite of mine. And, I do think food connects us in a very primal way. I think food has played a historic role in bringing people together. It will continue to do so. Whenever people think about Mexican, the first thing that they think is, these are really friendly people that share their food with everyone across the world. And if you think about international food, you're probably thinking Mexican, Chinese, Japanese, but there's a bunch of other countries that do not live in the collective mindset of food when you think about it. And so I think Mexico has built a bunch of bridges around food and will continue to do so. And, it's lovely to see the Borderlands engage in this culture of food exchange and sharing what is a fundamental aspect of societies. The food we grow, how we grow it in a changing climate, how we share it across a fragmented landscape. All of those things are important.
The border war is not going to be here forever, so eventually this conversation will because again, border wall and security are those topics that can just suck all the air, and then you forget about everything else. And again, it's very easy. It's even us that we're against falling into that trap, we just fell straight into the trap. And because the border wall is going to be there, but from the border to the south and from the border to the north, there's a lot of animal movement that needs to. It's like if you're well, but there's a Panama Canal, so why we should be working on connectivity of the whole continent? It's caught there. Mm-hmm. So it's at the end, it's it's not that important, right? If you think about it, there's going to be only some very small sort of species that will be incredibly affected by the wall. Pretty much everything that is bigger than this big will be stopped. Others will find a way. It's going to be an impact, but south of the wall, there's a whole universe, and north of the wall, there's a whole universe that we still have a lot of work to do, and it's still gorgeous, still amazing. There's amazing communities in both sides. So I think, for me, that's yes, it's there, but there's so many other stuff that we need to figure out, and eventually that thing is not going to be there either. And as an organization, I think that's our motto. It's not because the border wall is there, I'm not going to I'm going to stop restoring land and taking care of these other places. So not because the border wall is there, I'm going to stop educating kids and young professionals on what other alternatives. I think for all the now old ones, we need to remember how it was. Kind of like it's important to tell people like there was a time where there was no border wall and it was awesome. Like bison used to move back up. I saw them moving between Mexico and the States. Right, like I saw pronghorn jumping the barbed wire that used to be the border wall, like that existed. So I think we have a role on kind of like showing what it's important. And on favorite food, there's an obscure dish called caldo de queso, which is amazing. And it's pretty much just like cheese and green chili. And I feel it's like if you have that like in the top of the Sierra Madre with a little bit of bacanora, that's freaking heaven.
I'm rethinking my answer on this one.
And doesn't have meat, which is not very strong, but like it's honestly it's amazing.
I'm steal some of the words that you have said. I think with thinking about engine in our space about people, right? To me, it's connected, but thinking a different kind of type of connected than in terms of wildlife. Cohesive and collaborative are the words that come into mind. And it's really about this, as I kind of visualize the border, I just see things flying back and fluid over by both like by Zoom calls, by ideas, collaborations. It's like still feels really primeval, actually. And I'm not a wildlife biologist. I think of plants and seeds flying across, and ideas and inspiration. And so it's like I really am hopeful, really hopeful and inspired. I mean, just think about the talent and just the exceptionalism that I get to be surrounded by on a daily basis. Today's absolutely no exception. About all of our passions and energies and each what we do, and just thinking like I'm able to just kind of I'm really fortunate. I get to interact with a lot of people through my day and just know that it's like, oh, people doing a lot of amazing stuff and just trying to help create those connections. So that brings me, I get to live in a pretty hopeful space, being connected and talking to so many amazing people so frequently. So yeah, more of that for sure. And creating that pipeline, which is happening. It's so alive. And I can't not go with the Dogo Sonorense. I gotta go with Sonora.
Well, yeah, that's true.
I mean, and but like a copia de lechuguilla from the Sierra Madre too. You added that part.
If you haven't tried Sonora hot dogs, I mean, there's some in Hermosillo. They're not. Some in Tucson. They're not the best. But the way that I describe my friends Sonora hot dogs is that it's the bigger self of a hot dog. Like if a hot dog has ambitions, and those ambitions get full, then you get a Sonora hot dog. It's like a hot dog with like a PhD, 4 postdocs, 10-year track, 2 nature papers. Like, it's the hot dog. Still a hot dog.
Hot dog's cooler cousin. Also, I guess I'll start with food. It's the easier answer. Every time I go to Sonora, one of the first stops I make is the A store to get coyotas. They're a little pastry from Hermosillo, but they're just this little round pastry filled with either some sort of cream, like a date, peloncillo, but I always get those. And then related is café de olla, which is like just your coffee, but it's stewed kind of like cowboy style in a pot. And you throw in a cinnamon stick, some orange peel, and the peloncillo, that kind of Mexican style brown sugar, and it's awesome. It's my favorite. Especially doing field work in Sonora, we just make a big pot of it and then you just drink it all day. Yeah. Working in the Borderlands, I'll push back a little bit. I think one of the roles, there's a lot of great people, there's a lot of hope, there's a lot of reason to remain hopeful. But I think one of the roles we see is we need to tell the story, and we need to stop the normalization of the border as it's currently arranged. I'll give an example. These small wildlife openings that we'll go see, hopefully, they're tiny. They're very, very small. You'll be shocked at how small they are. Various people before us and with us and continuing have been asking for these, and the DHS agreed. Border Patrol has the authority to approve or disapprove locations for these openings. And so Nogales, they asked for, I think, 13 in this area. Ultimately, 6 locations were accepted, and then they were moved by Border Patrol to places where they had better ability to watch them. And I asked, why? What are you afraid of? We've had thousands of videos, thousands of hours over 3 years of cameras on these openings elsewhere where they had previously been installed. People never used them. We had people walking by with ladders, we had people walking by with ropes. They would look at them, they'd laugh at them, but they never tried to use them. So I was like, why are you worried about these being exploited? They're like, oh, no, we don't think people will go through them. We just think they'll be used for smuggling.
Yeah.
They were dead serious, and they took it as real. The gaps in the border wall are 4 inches. The gaps in the wildlife opening is 8 inches. What can you smuggle through an 8-inch gap that you can't throw over or push through a 4-inch gap? Like,
Twice the size.
but at the same time, like this, I think this is the narrative. We're accepting this as more and more normal, and this is the story in politics in general, right? Like these kind of obscure fears, or whatever fears, policies, decisions, they're becoming normalized, and we're accepting them as valid. The whole need to tell 2 sides of the story of like, well, yeah, the conservationists are worried about connectivity, but on the other hand, this issue or that issue, like I think our role is continuing to push back on that sliding scale so that we stop accepting some of these things as normal and as okay. And so I think our role as Sky Island is to continue to tell the story of the Borderlands, the amazing connectivity, the amazing collaborations and hope, and the amazingness of the region, but also reminding people that we're witnessing like a apocalyptic level catastrophe here. $20 million a mile to build this thing, millions and millions of dollars a mile to maintain it for nothing. You need a $50 angle grinder to cut it or a rope to climb over it. I have watched both happen. So I just think that we need to keep telling the story and reminding people that what we're witnessing is not normal, is not okay. We need to stop accepting it as okay, because it's not.
Yeah, and the American people need to understand, they're wasting public money. They're basically channeling a lot of public money into the pockets of the contractors building the wall for absolutely nothing. The border wall is not stopping people. Most migration is not happening across the border wall, but with, extended visas and stuff like that. And so it is absurd, but it's also destructive. And if people see only one part of it, only the destructive part of it, they might be willing to accept it. But if they see how absurd it is, then maybe they'll decide it's time to bring it down.
And I think, I mean, we're not going to have time to enjoy the binational nature of where we're at, but like when you live in Tucson, my dentist is like 15 minutes away from here in Nogales, and my partner and I were Mexicans, and we're like, if I need a doctor, I'm crossing the border. If I need a car mechanic, my car mechanic is in Agua Prieta, Sonora. He's amazing. And like you start facing this like dual life where you go back and forth. People that both with all their heart that the border wall should be installed, they go to the same dentist that I go to. And so there's a lot of absurdities and like it's kind of like
surreal.
Yeah, like very, very surreal, because you will and you will be talking with like full-time Trumpists in X ranch, and they'll be like, but dude, my best workers have been Mexicans. And they're like, and you're telling me that? And it's kind of very weird, like where we go from here in this conversation. So this place gives you again like no one is, I feel like no one is that pure in this place, because you have like you just live in a place full of contradictions.
Thank you for listening. We hope this is only the beginning of an ongoing discussion on the future of the Borderlands. This is Michelle Maria Erli Capistran, signing off.